In 1983, American military involvement was also stepped up on the other side of the world, in the Middle East, where Iran and Iraq had been at war since September 1980. In August 1983, this conflict took a new turn when Iraq declared a naval exclusion zone. The states surrounding the Persian Gulf supply over a third of the world's crude oil, and any disruption in the steady flow could have a crippling effect on Western economies. Both Iran and Iraq were determined to keep their own oil flowing to pay for the war. Iraq had the advantage of an overland pipeline into Turkey, but Iran's exports almost all went by sea, funneled through the narrow straits of Hormuz. The United States had already said it would do whatever was necessary to keep the straits open to international traffic. A mixed task force of American, British, French, and Australian naval vessels had helped provide escort for neutral tankers since the beginning of the war. Despite this, there had already been a few casualties and shipping losses. The tankers generally traveled in convoy for mutual protection, hugging the coastline either side of the Gulf to gain protection from shore-based anti-aircraft batteries. Helicopters were used extensively as decoys against hostile missiles, using their speed and maneuverability to escape being hit at the last moment. They were not always successful, though, as the tanker Bridgeton discovered in 1987 when an Iraqi Exocet found its mark. Extra protection was provided mainly by U.S. warships, operating in rotation from both the Atlantic and the Pacific. To begin with, each unit stayed on station for 4 months, but this was reduced to 2 as the shooting war got hotter. After France supplied Iraq with long-range Super Étendard naval strike aircraft and Exocet missiles, Iran responded by threatening to close the Straits of Hormuz. In 1986, they installed Chinese Silkworm anti-ship missiles around Bandar Abbas Air Base. On board U.S. warships in the Gulf, crews were almost permanently at action stations.
Bearing range anymore. Bearing range. After 35 minutes.
One of the principal weapons deployed was the Stinger man-portable anti-aircraft missile. This lightweight system fires a missile at over twice the speed of sound to a range of some 3 miles, guidance being by passive infrared sensor. It's a very accurate weapon, which incorporates an identification friend or foe mechanism to prevent friendly aircraft being shot down by mistake. Stinger is only one of the anti-aircraft systems used on modern American warships. The most sophisticated is the Aegis radar tracking system, fitted to Ticonderoga-class guided missile cruisers. This can track multiple targets simultaneously and fire standard SM-2 medium-range missiles from banks of launches. The SM-2 is a supersonic missile with semi-active homing and a range of over 15 miles. It was, unfortunately, one such missile fired from the USS Vincennes, which accidentally shot down an Iranian A300 Airbus in July 1988, killing all 286 people on board. The ship's captain said they had the aircraft identified as an F-14 Tomcat, but no one has satisfactorily explained why, because an F-14 is only a third the size of an Airbus. As a purely defensive measure, U.S. warships can also dispense chaff to confuse the radar guidance on some forms of missile. A number of merchant ships were fitted with similar systems as the war dragged on. One of the most potent weapons deployed in the Gulf War was the French Exocet, fired from Iraqi Mirages, Super Étendards, and Frelon helicopters. The AM-39 is a radar-guided solid-fueled missile, which drops rapidly to wave-top height after launch to help prevent detection. Flying just below the speed of sound, it has a range of over 40 miles and a 364-pound warhead, which had already proved its destructiveness in the Falklands War. In May 1987, the 3,700-ton frigate USS Stark became the first American warship to be hit by an Exocet. Modern warships only have light armor, relying on their anti-missile defenses to prevent a hit in the first place. In this case, the ship's Phalanx close-in weapon system was unable to cope. As a result, the Iraqi Exocet blew an enormous hole in the hull and superstructure just below the bridge, killing 37 men. However, the Stark was not holed below the waterline and managed to limp to safety, escorted by other warships. Clearing up the damage and preparing the bodies for burial was still a heartbreaking task for men who thought they were helping to keep world peace. Ironically, although 274 ships of different nationalities were attacked by Iraqi Exocets and Iranian Maverick missiles during 1987 alone, with 64 deaths, the lumbering tankers suffered the least. As well as missiles, mines were also a constant danger. During 1987, Iran intensified its mine-laying activities. In September that year, the U.S. Middle East Force flagship LaSalle intercepted an Iranian landing craft, the Iran Aja, converted to the mine-laying role. On board were dozens of Mark M08 percussion-fused mines packed with 250 pounds of explosive, preset to lie about 40 feet beneath the surface, where they would do the most damage to a tanker. The mines were not fused, but were otherwise fully warmed up, ready to be laid. The Iranians seemed careless of whose ships suffered. Part of the reason for this was that both Kuwait and Saudi Arabia sided tacitly with Iraq in the conflict, and their vessels became prime targets for the Iranians. The tankers generally survived attacks from either mines or missiles, though, because of their sheer bulk and carefully compartmented construction. But not all were lucky. The commander of LaSalle provided his own commentary.
The waters west of Farsi Island, where the Bridgeton was hit, are international waters. I think the principle is the same. International water is international water, and that's where they're laying mines, and it's wrong.
But essentially, it was right under the noses of U.S. forces.
Perhaps they were a bit bolder than they should have been. But again, the key here is not to be complacent, to use your forces as well as you can. But it certainly indicates that the Gulf is still not a safe place to sail, but we're here to do a job.
U.S. naval forces also became well used to keeping prisoners from sunken Iranian and Iraqi ships under close guard. They were held, individually handcuffed and lying on stretchers in secure places such as helicopter hangars aboard LaSalle. Although the United States was not at war with either combatant, despite having crossed swords with both over recent years in the Lebanon and during the Tehran embassy hostage crisis, official U.S. policy throughout the Gulf War was that of an umpire. It was, however, a policy called into question during the so-called Iran-Gate scandal, when it was revealed that the Reagan administration had been secretly dealing with both sides. Most captives came from small gunboats, for as the untidy war of attrition dragged towards an end, the Iranians resorted to the use of tiny coastal craft fitted with RPG-7 anti-tank missile launchers and 23mm anti-aircraft guns. One such boat was discovered drifting abandoned by the crew of the USS Stark's sister ship, Reuben James. This was the fourth such craft captured by the American Middle East Force in a single 6-month period. Western navies were not alone in patrolling the Gulf to help prevent the conflict spreading. The Soviet Navy also maintained a presence of about 25 surface ships and submarines throughout the conflict, including Krivat-class patrol vessels. Slightly smaller than the Reuben James and Stark, these are armed with anti-submarine as well as anti-aircraft missiles and 100mm guns. Despite the fact that both superpowers were anxious to avoid a confrontation in the Gulf, which could have led to global escalation, helicopters kept an alert watch and gun crews were closed up during such encounters. Iranian SRN-7 hovercraft were another common sight. The British Royal Navy maintained a force of around 12 ships in the Gulf Battle Group until the final ceasefire between Iran and Iraq in August 1988. Working closely with U.S. warships, one of the greatest contributions made by the Royal Navy was in minesweeping. Frigates and destroyers regularly streamed paravanes on steel wires to cut through the mooring lines of submerged mines and bring them to the surface, where they could be destroyed by machine gun fire. The minesweepers normally operated in threes to clear a channel wide enough for a supertanker. Each vessel in the flotilla following directly behind the paravane trailed by the ship in front to give complete overlap. At the end of each run, the paravanes would be hauled inboard to be checked over prior to the next operation. To counter the threat posed by free-floating acoustic or magnetic mines, which cannot be swept by conventional means, the Royal Navy also deployed remote-controlled submersibles. Originally designed for the underwater inspection of offshore oil rigs, these have now become standard mine-hunting equipment. Wire-guided, they are fitted with searchlights and television cameras, as well as active sonar, and patrol directly ahead of the mine-hunting warship.
On searchlight.
Searchlight, sir.
There's the MD. Roger, there's the MDC. Okay. Come left 350.
Left 350.
Reduce speed.
Value A, 2 yards. Value B, 2.5 yards. Yard of shadow, possible mine.
Check possible mine. I think that looks like the mine we...
After detection, the mines could be destroyed by rapid fire from the 20mm Oerlikon cannon now fitted to most Royal Navy warships. One of the most modern British vessels on the scene was the Type 42 destroyer HMS York, which was only commissioned in 1985. These missile-armed ships are specifically designed for area-air defense. While the U.S. Navy continues to maintain a presence in the Gulf, the British warships have now been recalled to other duties. In April 1988, the United States Navy took drastic action in retaliation for the Iranian mine-laying. Since the Karg Island oil terminal had come under repeated Iraqi attack since early in the war, Iran had switched much of its production to the offshore rigs at Sasan and Siri. On the 18th of April, the frigate USS Samuel B. Roberts issued a warning to the crews of both platforms that they were going to be destroyed. After the Iranians evacuated the platforms, sailors from the Roberts boarded them and discovered large numbers of anti-aircraft guns and missiles. The platforms were then destroyed by gunfire, while aircraft from the carrier Enterprise prevented any interference. Empty shell cases could be seen bobbing in the water. The Iranian boats tried foolishly to attack the Roberts and were blown out of the water. President Reagan said, "If they threaten us, they'll pay a price." The Iranians retaliated to the loss of the rigs by sending patrol ships into the Strait of Hormuz in a frontal attack on warships of the Middle East force. Once their intentions were clear, American frigates engaged them with their 76mm bow guns and sunk them. An Iranian fighter aircraft was also shot down by a Standard missile.
General quarters, all hands man your battle stations.
This unique footage shows the bridge aboard the USS Vincennes while under attack by a number of Iranian gunboats. It is typical of operations during the Gulf War. During this action, she fired on and destroyed an Iranian Airbus airliner.
Iranian Revolutionary Guard patrol boats maneuvering at speed 4 nautical miles northwest of Ras Sheikh 2. Your actions are not in accordance with the rights of innocent passage. Leave Omani territorial waters immediately. Now, Tarakat Shah.
Direct contact,
He says it might be one of the close rifles on the activist, but I can't tell.
354 true and
It is a large contact.
Still inbound. One appears to be going out to starboard and one's in the middle.
I'm just off the starboard bow, has a machine gun on it, according to 6. Fast move, just off the starboard bow.
350 is inbound. Relative. That's it now.
Very well.
the contact, read contact on port beam. 5 degrees up there. Oh man, he's right behind him. 300.
We had him, got it. That was a dead on. Relax. Ethan on is down. Knock it off. Direct hit. President, hold the ship crossing the Iranian declared war zone line.
By July 1988, with the Iraqi army in Basra and a new offensive gaining momentum, it was obvious that Iran could no longer continue the war. Ceasefire talks, encouraged by the United Nations, commenced on the 8th of August, after the Iraqis voluntarily withdrew from the captured territory, and peace negotiations began in Geneva on the 25th of the same month. The 8-year conflict was finally over.